Alright, so it's been a while since I did one of these videos. I started rewatching the Arrowverse. I did all 5 seasons of The Flash, ranking all the episodes with each season, and then also doing top 10 lists, top 10 best and worst episodes of that show. And then I got to Arrow, did the first 4 seasons, and that was like 2 months ago when I ranked the 4th season of Arrow. And with the 5th season being my favorite season, you would expect that I would go into that really quickly, but I just completely stopped for 2 months or however long it was, and the reason for that is because the season started. There's a lot of reviews, a lot of crisis news in particular, and also the timeline videos that I started doing. I first of all enjoyed those videos a lot more, and also not only are they a lot easier to make, they also tend to get a lot more views. The crisis videos also tend to get a lot more views, so I wasn't really motivated to make this video with the next couple of rankings of Arrow, but also I kind of wanted to wait till I was closer to the end of Arrow. Like once Arrow ends, I could rank all the seasons and then do a top 10 list for all of the episodes, and there's no reason I can't like space these out, make this ranking for season 5 now, then for season 6 I could do way later, season 7 later, and then 8 all the way at the end of the show in February, whenever it's going to end, or January, whichever one it is. So I wasn't motivated to do this. I also wanted to space it out a little bit more, not to finish all these videos really quickly like those months ago, so I just pushed this off till now. But with that in mind, in this video I'll be ranking all 23 episodes of season 5 of Arrow, which is my favorite season of the show, and these episodes are mostly really good. So as opposed to the last time I did this with the season 4 of Arrow, this video will be a lot more positive. But anyway, let's get into the ranking.
We're trapped.
This is the only episode of the season that I think is worse than even one episode in Arrow Season 4. It would be around like the 8th or 9th best episode of Season 4. So still, it's not as bad as the worst of Season 4, but it's still not really Season 5 material. This episode obviously focuses around Felicity quite a lot. It focuses around the whole storyline with Felicity not thinking that Oliver trusts him, which I think was a terrible storyline in Season 4. And while the conclusion to that in this episode makes a lot more sense than it ever did, it's still something that I didn't really want to see. Not to mention, the flashbacks are not exactly what I would call good. The only thing good about this episode is the ending when Adrian Chase actually kidnapped William. That was pretty cool, and obviously his appearance. But other than that, this episode had to be the worst of the season by far.
This is getting good.
This episode does have some good fight scenes and some good storylines. However, the reason it's like near the bottom of the list is because Felicity does take center stage, which is not exactly as interesting, but also it reveals that Laurel is from Earth 2 and not from Earth 1. I know it narratively wouldn't make much sense to kill her off and then bring her back not that much long later, but I would have preferred that. They made a mistake killing her off, a huge mistake, and they should have just brought her back. So I didn't love the reveal, which they revealed in the trailers that this is actually Black Siren. However, this episode does have a lot of great moments as well, making it, I think, better than any episode in Season 4, but still one of the worst of this season.
You're just feeding into a vicious cycle.
Find whoever did this.
I have to before he does it again.
This is a problem that the Green Arrow can't solve.
This episode taking on gun control didn't really work for the most part. I don't think it's as bad as the one in Season 3 of Supergirl, which is titled Not Kansas, which is probably the worst episode of that show. It's incredibly one-sided and incredibly terrible. It's just really bad. This episode, I don't think it's bad. I just think it's boring. It doesn't do an incredible job at tackling this issue, especially since 2 of the main characters use guns all the time, Spartan and Wild Dog. The debates in this episode are a lot more two-sided than on Supergirl, like way more, but this episode, I think, is definitely one of the least interesting episodes of this season.
It's your security.
We have to get Felicity out of Helix.
You're willing to do whatever it takes to stop Chase.
This is our only chance.
Don't do this.
You'll have to stop me.
This is another episode that is certainly worsened by the fact that it focuses mostly on Felicity Smoke. However, I actually think it's not bad. I do like what they did here with Felicity, making her an antagonist to Team Arrow, making her go down this dark path. It's one of the more interesting things they ever did with the character, and honestly, I wish they continued that, making her maybe a full-on villain down the road. However, focusing on Felicity never works for an episode, and it always makes it worse than it could have been had it focused on Oliver Queen or really any other character. Not to mention that there's a lot of hacking in this episode, and I really don't like that part of Arrow like ever, so this episode is one of the weaker episodes of the season, but I did mostly enjoy it, and it is still, I think, pretty good.
I can't make a move with the ACU breathing down my neck.
You're under arrest for the murder of Detective William Malone.
This episode does have some pretty bad villains in Cupid, China White, and Liza Warner. I don't think terrible, but not exactly good. And definitely one of the only episodes in the season where the villain wasn't good, or at least wasn't great. So that didn't work very well. However, the fight scenes are really good. The tone of the episode still really works, which is true for basically every episode of the season, even maybe underneath. But this episode does have some pretty good flashbacks, and I do like the storyline with the cops chasing down Green Arrow, and in the end, they team up with him, which is, I think, really, really satisfying ending to that storyline. So overall, still a pretty good episode.
Look tough.
You never should have come back to Russia.
In this episode, Team Arrow goes to Russia, which is kind of fun, especially considering Anatoly Knyazev is involved. He has an antagonistic role for a while, but then he does become a supporting character, which I think works really well. The flashbacks are really good. The action scenes are really good. Overall, definitely another great episode. However, one thing I didn't really love about this episode was Ragman. The fact that he debuted and then 8 episodes later he left the show. I'm not a fan of that. I just think he didn't appear enough. I don't know why they made him leave. Maybe it's budgetary. Maybe because the actor wanted to leave. I don't really know. But I think narratively it does not work at all for him to leave in an episode so close to when he debuted.
I don't think he can feel pain. If Samson is building an army, then I'm gonna need mine.
Suit up!
Oh, is that just your thing?
This episode has some good fight scenes, a good villain in Derek Sampson, definitely a very comic book feeling villain, or a cartoony villain with Derek Sampson, which I think typically doesn't really fit Arrow, but in this episode, I think it definitely works. The flashbacks are really good, the side storyline with Diggle is very good, and seeing the team working together after coming together in the last 2 episodes, I think it works really well, making for a pretty good episode.
The city just experienced the equivalent of a terrorist attack.
I would think this would be a good time for you to test out your new team.
They're too green.
Some could say the same about you.
This episode has some pretty awesome fight scenes, it's got great flashbacks, and the main storyline with Oliver recruiting Wild Dog, Artemis, Mr. Terrific, and later Ragman into the team, it's, I think, a lot of fun. I think the Prometheus appearance at the end of the episode also ties it all together, and it's a pretty awesome second appearance of the character, making this episode a pretty good episode, but still fairly middle of the road for this season.
Church is planning something big.
Go. Do not die.
Again, another very good episode, an episode with a storyline with Oliver and Lila trying to break Diggle out of prison, which they successfully do, which is a great storyline, a lot of fun, and it is, just really, really good. The flashbacks also in this episode are great, and the storyline with the team, although Felicity kind of does take a lead, which I don't love, the actual storyline with Wild Dog, Artemis, Ragman, and Mr. Terrific, all trying to go up against and take down Tobias Church, and then Wild Dog is captured, I think that is all a very good storyline. Again, another very good episode.
If you get in my way, I'll send the 3 of you back to Star City with your nuts in a sling.
To be honest, this episode did not look like it was going to be very good until the ending, which made it really, really good. The flashbacks were good the entire time, but I think the Felicity storyline, not exactly what I would call good, and that never really got good. And then the storyline with the new Black Canary, Tina Boland, was something that I didn't really enjoy, because Tina Boland is not a character in the comics, and I didn't like the idea of them introducing a new Black Canary whose name is Tina Boland. But also in this episode, she wasn't exactly likable. Her first 3 lines of dialogue dialogue. All three of them mentioned male genitals, and the way she talked, she was not exactly a likable character. However, this episode does have some pretty awesome fight scenes, and the ending in the flashbacks with Oliver putting on the hood for the first time, becoming the hood for the first time, that's awesome. And then the reveal that she's actually Dinah Drake, and then she instantly becomes a way more likable character because of the name change or the reveal of her name, but also the way she acts after she kills Sean Sonis. So all of that ties this episode together, making it a very, very good episode in my opinion.
He knows you're Oliver Queen.
I thought you were hiring me to kill the Green Arrow. Nope. You're gonna kill the mayor.
This episode has some great action. The flashbacks are pretty good. The storyline with Wild Dog being tortured by Church, it's all pretty great. Not to mention, obviously, that the titular character, Human Target, it's a great introduction in this episode, complete with a pretty good storyline. And obviously, again, Prometheus being the best part of the episode, where in the end, he kills Church after Church tells him that Oliver Queen is the Green Arrow, even though it seems like you already knew that. Anyway, this episode certainly is what I think a pretty great episode.
This is a war. You're not getting the job done. This is a war that I'm gonna fight it the right way, as I am all this city has.
This episode, like the rest of the season, has some pretty great fight scenes and a lot of great moments, and Vigilante, I think, was a great antagonist in this episode. The rivalry between the Green Arrow and Vigilante is very good in this episode, probably better than any episode in the season, and definitely in the show. But obviously, there's a lot to go on in this episode, like the flashbacks are pretty great, the storyline with Thea and Quentin is pretty good, and even a little bit emotional, not incredibly emotional, but definitely a little bit, and while the ending with Artemis being revealed to work for Prometheus didn't really end up being a great twist, at the time, I think it definitely was.
Corruption. You want me? Come on!
This episode is so damn good. The storyline with Oliver being impeached, it's really, really good, and Vigilante going up against New Team Arrow, or Team Arrow itself, it's all great, and the fight scenes are pretty good, but it's obviously Prometheus' role in this episode that is the best part of this episode. Not only do they reveal his identity in, I think, one of the greatest twists in the Arrowverse because of how they used Vigilante and Adrian Chase, nobody, including myself, thought that he would be Prometheus, so the fact that they revealed that Adrian Chase, who in the comics is Vigilante, and Vigilante is right there this entire time is Prometheus, that I thought was a great reveal and a great twist. Not to mention that in the end, how he kidnapped Susan Williams, setting up the next episode. This episode definitely did a lot for Prometheus, and I think that it deserved, because of that, and also because of all the other storylines, including the flashbacks being pretty good, it deserves to be fairly high on the list and recognized for being a very good episode.
These killings are some kind of message that Prometheus is sending to Oliver.
You got a to-kill list. Prometheus is saying you're the serial killer.
This episode, again, it's basically most of the episodes in the season are fairly great. I don't really know what to say to add to that. Like, the tone of all the episodes are great, the fight scenes are almost always great, the storyline, and Prometheus himself, it all works so well. This episode is basically just like an Arrow Season 5 episode, just like in that regard. There are other things, like the fact that Team Arrow has to live with the fact now, and they learn that Oliver used to be the Hood and used to be a serial killer, which I think is a storyline that does work. And the ending with Quentin being revealed to have some sort of connection to Prometheus, which later it's revealed that in the next couple episodes that Prometheus was just messing with him, but I think that was a great twist ending to this episode, making this, I think, the 10th best episode of the season, and yet still a very, very good one.
They're here.
He's mine!
Again, another great episode. In this episode, there's this whole storyline of a box being delivered to Oliver Queen, which turns out to be proof that Robert Queen murdered somebody. That was, I think, a great storyline. And Prometheus' plan in this episode, it all works so well, with the final confrontation between Team Arrow and Prometheus being pretty awesome, and especially that moment where after Prometheus is captured and Oliver is giving a speech on TV saying that they caught Prometheus, he's smiling in his cell. It's moments like that that make me like Prometheus so much. So all in all, again, another great episode.
Stay away from Chase.
This episode deals with the fallout from Cabochon, where Oliver just completely quit his whole crusade, and this episode goes with Oliver hiring the Bratva to take down Prometheus, and obviously Diggle having a problem with that. I think the confrontation here between Diggle and Oliver is really, really good, and Prometheus in this episode is incredible. Like, the last couple minutes of this episode, all involving Prometheus, the world learning that he's Adrian Chase, and while I didn't love the storyline with Felicity, and I don't even remember her name off the top of my head, but the storyline in Helix, I didn't love it because of who it focused on. I did like where it went and how it contributed to the storyline as the world learning that Prometheus is Adrian Chase, and then that scene where he's attacked but then manages to escape and then drives right past the police in a bloodied car, or he's bloodied in a car. It's, I think, so incredibly badass, and overall a very, very good episode.
My friends have orders to kill yours.
Think you're about to get a phone call?
The penultimate episode of the season I thought was a very, very good one, and quite possibly the best penultimate episode of this show. However, I didn't exactly double check that. It might be. This episode I think is really, really good. I don't like the beginning that much with all the illicity stuff. However, once that all settles down and once Prometheus's plan starts to come into fruition, the episode becomes so intense and the tone is so great. The return of Malcolm Merlin and then also Nis Al Ghul, but then in the end Deathstroke. It's all so exciting, but the whole storyline with Prometheus trying to escape and managing to escape because he kidnapped William in episode 20, and then he says the line, "I'll see you on the boat," foreshadowing the next episode, directly calling out what's going to happen, calculating what's going to happen in Liang Yu. It's, again, why I love this villain so much, making this another great episode, and quite possibly the best penultimate episode of this show.
Is necessary, or I shouldn't be up there at all.
Which is exactly why I can't be.
So you've probably maybe heard me say this before, but after, or actually during the end of Season 4, I didn't even watch the last couple episodes. I completely quit the show until I saw the trailer for Season 5 because the trailer looked really good. Now, the trailer was mostly from the first episode, and that's because the first episode was really, really good. It's crazy how good this first episode is. I think it does so much right. Not only do they up the action to like 11, the action in this episode is incredible with the fight scenes, with the parachute scene, with the helicopter scene. It all looks so amazing, and it is all just great. Not to mention that I think the way they deal with Laurel's death and how that affects Oliver, where he goes back to killing a little bit here or there, I do think that that's probably the best thing to come out of Laurel's death at the beginning of the season. Not to mention that the debut of Prometheus was pretty great as well, making this, I think, probably the best premiere of this show, and also probably the Arrowverse.
Shared hallucination.
Oliver, are you okay?
I'm fine. These head games aren't over.
Starting off the top 5 is the crossover episode. This episode is a very not crossover-esque episode, as while there are aliens and it is in space, it mostly focuses around the characters of Arrow, and it mostly focuses around the world of Arrow. It doesn't, even the title card doesn't have the Lightning Bolt or Supergirl's S or even the Legends, because it's the 100th episode of Arrow, and as the 100th episode of Arrow, it's kind of a tribute to the show, and I think it's great. It shows a romance and a world where Oliver never went on the boat, where he ended up marrying Laurel, which is something that anyway should have happened on the show, but either way, it is definitely still pretty good to see in this episode. But I think the fight scenes are pretty great, but also the ending when Oliver is about to leave the dream world, and he sees all of these people, either dead or alive, but important people in his lives, saying very memorable quotes from the past of Arrow, which is actually legitimately a little bit emotional, making for a great moment. And overall, this episode I think was a great crossover episode, but more so a great 100th episode for this show.
We have to find Susan. I'm 10 steps ahead of you, and you haven't even figured out what game we're playing yet.
This was the episode where Oliver learned that Adrian is Prometheus, and that opened up a whole new can of worms, a whole new rivalry, the likes of which Arrow and the Arrowverse has never seen, or at least in one given season. As in this episode, the rivalry between Oliver and Adrian is incredible. I think the writing is really good, very, very memorable lines, like, I'm 10 steps ahead of you, and you don't even know what game we're playing yet. It's an amazing line, not to mention that when Oliver confronts Adrian, he says, "You look a little ragged, are you tired, or have you been asleep this entire time?" time. Just so many great lines and great writing from this episode. Not to mention that, like I said, the rivalry is great, but also the action and the fight scenes in this episode are top notch. And the ending with Oliver being captured and kidnapped by Prometheus and then being chained up in whatever place he's being chained up in, leading it to the next episode, I think all works really, really well. And this rivalry is really what held up this season, making it my favorite season of Arrow.
Love who you trust, who you've hurt. Evelyn, why?
This city needs to be saved from you.
Like I keep on saying, this season has such a great tone, so many great fight scenes, and a great storyline and villain, all of which is true in this episode. In this episode, the dark, grim tone works perfectly for the season finale and what it's trying to do. The connections back to season 1 and Oliver's original crusade where he did kill people, and how that in these flashbacks we see here, Diggle tries to make him to maybe stop, as there might be consequences, which it is convenient that it's that actual one where there is consequences, but still, it doesn't really take away much from the episode. As this episode, I think, again, the tone is great. Prometheus is a great villain. The writing in this episode is top notch. Like the line where Prometheus says, "Everything you touch will die," or "I'm going to show you everything you touch will die." I think it's such a memorable line, and there's so many great conversations between Oliver and Prometheus. The fight scenes are great. The flashbacks are really good, and the reveal at the end that Laurel is back, while that didn't really lead to something that I loved when it originally came out, it blew my mind, and I was really hoping that was the actual Laurel. It doesn't really make much sense, but it doesn't matter because Laurel should not have died, and bringing her back like this is the best way to redeem themselves, which they have done in other ways, but still, this was an insane ending to this episode, making this, I think, probably the second best mid-season finale of this show, but definitely very, very close to Three Ghosts, maybe even a little bit better.
Go to hell. I've already been there, Oliver.
So rewatching this season, I kind of had a difficult time choosing between the number 1 and 2 slot, because while I did think that Confrontation was at number 2, and that does end up being the case, it's a lot closer than I expected. This episode, I think, is incredible. All the build-up to that moment, you obviously know the moment I'm talking about, but all the build-up, the fight scenes and the flashbacks, and the interactions between Adrian and Oliver, the fact that most of this episode not only follows Adrian and Oliver, but also Oliver in the past, but has barely any of the other characters, which is something that always, or almost always, enhances the scenes and the episode when it mostly focuses on Oliver and the villain, or sometimes even just Oliver. But obviously this all leads up to the incredible moment, maybe the most intense moment in the Arrowverse, and definitely I think the best acted moment in the entirety of the Arrowverse, and that is when Oliver admits to Adrian and to himself that he enjoyed killing. He wanted to and he liked it. An amazing moment, definitely an incredibly intense and incredibly well acted moment, and probably my favorite moment of the entirety of the show. However, despite this episode is still not the number 1 best episode of this season, despite being, I think, incredible and certainly one of the best of the show.
Get your son back. You know what you have to do.
I have no interest in this being a fair fight.
Arrow Season 5 was looking like it was going to be pretty good, however, the finale stuck the landing in a way that nobody expected it to, as Oliver brought together the likes of Malcolm Merlin, Nyssa Al Ghul, Deathstroke, and even Captain Boomerang to face off against Adrian's team, Prometheus' team, in this final epic battle, which also all led to a one-on-one fight between Oliver and Prometheus, which I think was a great fight, also how it connected to the flashback similar to the Season 2 finale, but also, while this episode does have some scenes, like specifically the scenes between Felicity and Samantha, which I don't exactly love, it is easy to forgive because the actual scenes between Oliver and Adrian are all the fight scenes, and even obviously the ending with the VNU explosion, which didn't really end well, but still was an incredible cliffhanger. Not to mention the flashbacks, which had an awesome fight scene that connected to the pilot episode of this show, which is something that is a pretty big accomplishment that they actually managed to do that, which I think was awesome. We also got a bonus scene after what we saw in the pilot episode, as we see a scene of Oliver telling Moira that he is alive, which is gotta be one of the more emotional scenes on this show, which definitely further enhances it. Overall, this episode has gotta be the best episode of this season of this show, and probably of the Arrowverse. So anyway, let me know what your ranking would be, or at least your least favorite or your most favorite, maybe your top 5 best and top 5 worst episodes of this season. And if you like this video, make sure to leave a like, share, and subscribe, and thanks for watching.